My dad timed my panic attacks with a stopwatch to see which parking lots made the most money. When I finally asked him why they let me starve unless I performed, he smirked and said, "Because that's when you're most convincing." I just stared at him. That was 12 years ago. Last night, he left a voicemail, crying so hard I couldn't understand a single word. I was 6 when my parents discovered I could cry on command. Not fake tears, real, heartbreaking sobs that made strangers reach for their wallets. They'd been living off expired food bank donations and whatever change they found in couch cushions, too lazy to work, but creative enough to see opportunity in their daughter's tears. It started with an accident. Mom had dragged me to the grocery store, and when she couldn't afford milk, I started crying from genuine hunger. A stranger handed her $40. I watched my mother's face change, like she discovered buried treasure. That night, she practiced pinching my arm until I cried on cue. Again, she'd say, cigarette dangling from her lips, make it more real. By 7, I didn't need the pinch anymore. I knew my cue. When Mom cleared her throat twice, the tears would fall. They trained me like a circus animal, except my trick was genuine despair that I could summon at will. Dad would time me with his phone. 30 seconds to full sob, he'd announce proudly. That's my girl. The rules were simple but absolute. Never use the same store twice in a month. Always wear the same stained pink dress, my work uniform, that Mom carefully maintained to look pitiful, but not suspicious. Look strangers in the eye when crying, but never speak unless they ask a direct question. And most importantly, never tell anyone what we were doing. You want to eat tonight, don't you? Dad would say, counting bills on our mattress on the floor. This is your job. Every family member contributes. They mapped out territories like generals planning a campaign, grocery stores on Mondays, doctor's office parking lots on Tuesdays, people already emotional from bad news or sick children, the unemployment office on Fridays. Dad would stay in the car with the engine running, pretending to fix something under the hood while Mom worked me like a wind-up toy. I learned the science of manipulation. Let the first tear roll slowly, hiccup twice before the sob, make my hands shake just enough to seem vulnerable but not sick. Some days I made $300 before lunch. My parents would celebrate with gas station wine while I sat in the corner, practicing my expressions in a cracked mirror. They called me their little gold mine. But the worst part wasn't the performing. It was how good I got at reading people. The woman with the designer purse who'd give guilt money, always approach her near her car, never inside the store. The grandfather who'd see his own grandchild in my tears, mention being hungry but never ask directly. My parents kept detailed notebooks. Tuesday's Suburban Target, 127s. Thursday's Medical Plaza, $245. They experimented with props, but nothing worked better than my tears alone. Pure talent, Mom would say, ruffling my unwashed hair. School became an afterthought. I missed so many days that teachers stopped asking. When I did attend, I'd fall asleep at my desk, exhausted from morning shifts. Other kids talked about their weekends at the park or movies. I counted money in my head, calculated which parking lots we hadn't hit this month. By 9, my reputation preceded me. Store security started recognizing us. Some good Samaritan offered to buy us groceries instead of giving cash, and Mom had to pretend to shop while I stood there, tears still drying on my cheeks, watching her put items in the cart we'd abandoned. What we needed wasn't food, it was rent money, or beer money, or scratch-off lottery money. The line blurred after a while. The breaking point came at a McDonald's. I was working the lunch crowd, Mom hovering nearby with her practiced look of desperation. A woman knelt down and wiped my tears with a napkin that smelled like French fries. "Sweetie, are you okay? Where's your daddy?" Before I could remember my script, she looked closer at my face. Recognition dawned like a slow sunrise. "Wait," she said slowly. "Weren't you at the Target last week? And the CVS last month? And the Walgreens before that?" Mom's hand clamped on my shoulder. We left so fast I could hear coins jingling in her pocket, but the woman followed us, took a picture of our license plate with her phone, posted it online within hours with a warning about a couple using a crying child to scam people. The comment section exploded. Others recognized us, shared their own encounters. Someone had even taken a video. Within days, we couldn't work anywhere. The grocery store banned us. Local Facebook groups shared our photos with warnings. My parents' laziness had finally caught up with them, but their solution was worse than I imagined. "You're getting too old for crying anyway," Mom said that night, studying my face like I was broken equipment. "But a girl who can perform on command, make herself whatever someone needs, that's worth something." She made phone calls while I pretended to sleep. I heard her negotiating, mentioning my age, my special skills, how I could be very convincing in any role. The real show was about to begin. I took the emergency 20 hidden in my shoe, money I'd stolen from my own earnings, and ran at dawn. The pavement was cold under my bare feet as I ran through the empty streets. My parents wouldn't wait for hours, not after their celebration drinking last night. They'd counted yesterday's earnings 3 times, arguing about whether to pay the electric bill or buy more lottery tickets. I'd memorized their patterns, knew their weaknesses better than they knew mine. I ducked behind a dumpster as a delivery truck rumbled past. The $20 pressed against my foot inside my shoe felt like freedom and terror mixed together. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Stolen from the pile they'd left on the kitchen counter, too hammered to count properly. The pink dress caught on a chain link fence as I squeezed through a gap. The ripping sound made me freeze. Mom had been so careful with this dress, washing it by hand, maintaining just the right level of wear. Now a long tear ran from hem to waist. Good. Let it tear. Let it fall apart like everything else they'd built on my tears. I found an abandoned shopping cart under a bridge and curled up inside it, pulling a piece of cardboard over myself. My body shook, but not from cold. From the memory of Mom's phone calls, the way she'd lowered her voice when discussing prices, how she described my talents to whoever listened on the other end. Sleep came in fragments. I dreamed of crying on command, but the tears wouldn't stop. They flooded the grocery stores, the parking lots, all the places I'd performed. I woke with real tears on my face, the kind that came without trying. By noon, hunger drove me from my hiding spot. I knew they'd be looking by now. Dad would check the obvious places first. The park where other kids played, the library where I sometimes hid between performances. Mom would be smarter. She'd think like me, try to predict where a 9-year-old with $20 might go. I avoided the main streets, sticking to alleys I'd memorized during our drives between territories. My stomach cramped from hunger, but I couldn't risk buying food yet, not until I was farther away. Every person I passed might recognize me from the photos online. The crying girl, the scammer's daughter. A woman at a bus stop studied me too long. I ducked into a hardware store, pretending to browse. The clerk watched me suspiciously. A dirty girl in a torn pink dress meant trouble or theft. I left quickly, my heart pounding. By evening, I'd made it 6 miles from home. My feet bled where the concrete had worn through skin. I finally risked buying a sandwich at a gas station, choosing one where the clerk barely looked up from his phone. The food tasted like survival. I slept that night in a playground tube slide, the plastic cold against my skin. Every car that passed made me curl tighter. They'd be searching now, really searching. Not just the lazy check of usual spots, but the desperate hunt of people whose income had vanished. The second day, I saw Dad's car twice. Once outside a grocery store where I'd worked the previous month. Once cruising slowly past a row of bus stops. I pressed myself behind a mailbox, watching him lean out the window, scanning faces. His expression wasn't worried or sad. It was angry. The same look when the lottery tickets came up empty. I kept moving, but exhaustion made me sloppy. At a public bathroom, I tried to clean the blood from my feet. A mother with 2 kids entered, took one look at me, and pulled out her phone. I ran before she could dial, leaving bloody footprints on the tile. The $20 dwindled. handled. Bus fare to get farther away. Band-aids for my feet. A bottle of water. I calculated each purchase like mom had taught me to calculate tears. What would bring the most return for the least investment? On the third night, I made a mistake. The laundromat was warm, and the owner had stepped out. I curled up behind a row of dryers, just for a few minutes, just to get warm. I woke to voices. Familiar voices. Mom stood at the counter, showing the owner something on her phone. A photo. Of me. I couldn't hear the words, but I recognized her performance. The concerned mother. The desperate parent. The same act she'd perfected while I cried for strangers. I crawled between machines, staying low. The exit was 20 feet away. 15. 10. Then Dad's shadow fell across the doorway. He leaned against the frame, pretending to smoke, but his eyes swept the room methodically. I reversed direction, heading for the back exit. Pushed the emergency door. An alarm shrieked. I ran into the alley as their shouts erupted behind me. Dad's footsteps pounded closer. Mom's voice called my name with fake sweetness that made my skin crawl. A fence blocked the alley's end, too high to climb with bleeding feet. I turned to face them, trapped like the child I was. They approached slowly now, knowing I had nowhere to go. Talk about child labor laws getting creative. These parents turned their kid into a walking ATM with a cry button. 6 years old and already working harder than her parents ever did, mastering the art of tears like some. Mom's face shifted into her sympathetic mask, the one she wore for social workers who occasionally checked on us. Dad hung back, letting her work. They'd choreographed this like all our other performances. She knelt in the dirty alley, arms open, spoke soft words about coming home, about missing me, about being worried. The same lies she'd told store managers when they questioned our presence. But I knew the truth. I wasn't their daughter. I was their gold mine, and gold mines don't get to choose where they're dug. Dad stepped closer, blocking any escape route. His hand moved to his pocket, not for a weapon, for his phone, still timing everything, still measuring my value in seconds and dollars. That's when I did the only thing I knew how. I cried, not the practiced tears of performance, but real sobs that shook my whole body. A woman emerged from the laundromat's back door, drawn by the alarm and commotion. She saw a dirty, bleeding child cornered by two adults in an alley. Mom's mask slipped for just a second, long enough for the woman to see something wrong in the picture. Dad noticed too. He backed away, hands visible, trying to look non-threatening, but they'd taught me too well. I knew how to read people, and this woman was already reaching for her phone. My parents exchanged a look, the same one when security guards got too interested. When Good Samaritans asked too many questions, they retreated, Mom calling over her shoulder about finding me later, about talking when I was ready, still performing for the witness. The woman approached carefully, asked if I was hurt, if those were my parents, if I needed help. I almost laughed. Help. From another stranger moved by another performance. But this time, the tears were real, and that made all the difference. She didn't offer money, didn't try to fix everything with $20 in sympathy. Instead, she sat on the dirty ground beside me and waited, just waited, while my parents' car circled the block, while the alarm finally stopped shrieking, while I decided what character to play next. The woman introduced herself as Victoria, while pulling tissues from her purse. She cleaned my feet with gentle movements, examining each cut. Her hands were steady, professional. I recognized the practiced care of someone who worked with children. A teacher maybe, or a nurse. My parents' car passed again, slower this time. I pressed against the wall, making myself small. Victoria noticed my reaction and positioned herself between me and the street. She suggested we move somewhere safer. The laundromat owner had returned, eyeing us with suspicion. Victoria spoke to him briefly, showing some kind of identification. He nodded and went back inside. She led me to her car, a modest sedan with a child's booster seat in the back. Family photos hung from the rearview mirror, real ones, not the staged kind my parents sometimes used as props. I climbed into the passenger seat, leaving bloody smears on the upholstery. Victoria didn't complain. We drove in silence for several minutes. I watched the familiar streets pass by, calculating distances and escape routes. Victoria pulled into a drugstore parking lot and left me with the doors locked while she went inside. Through the window, I watched her buy bandages, antiseptic, children's socks, and a package of wet wipes. She also bought 2 sandwiches and bottles of juice. Back in the car, she tended to my feet properly. The antiseptic stung, but I'd learned not to flinch from pain. She wrapped each foot carefully, then helped me into the new socks. They were soft and clean, with little flowers on them. I couldn't remember the last time I'd worn new socks. Victoria unwrapped one sandwich and handed it to me. I ate mechanically, tasting nothing. She asked gentle questions about where I lived, if I had somewhere safe to go. I gave vague answers, still deciding how much to reveal. Trust was a luxury I couldn't afford. Her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and frowned before answering. I heard her acknowledge someone, mentioning she was with a child who needed help. The conversation was brief and professional. When she hung up, her expression had changed. More alert, more careful. She explained she worked at a community center that helped families in crisis. They had resources, safe places for children. I could rest there while they figured out next steps. No pressure, no questions I didn't want to answer. Just somewhere warm with a bed and food. The offer sounded too good. Everything had a price. I'd learned that from watching my parents work their angles, but my feet throbbed through the bandages, and exhaustion made thinking difficult. I nodded agreement, already planning my escape route for later. The community center was a converted house in a neighborhood I didn't recognize. Victoria parked in the back, away from the street. She helped me inside through a door that required a code. The interior smelled like coffee and cleaning supplies. Children's drawings covered one wall. A donation box sat by the entrance, half full of canned goods. A woman named Tori met us in the hallway. She was younger than Victoria, with tired eyes and paint stains on her jeans. They spoke quietly while I stood there, trying not to drip blood through the bandages. Tori kept glancing at me with an expression I couldn't read. Not pity exactly, something more complicated. They showed me to a small room with a single bed and a window overlooking the parking lot. The sheets were mismatched but clean. A folded towel sat on the pillow with a toothbrush and travel-sized toothpaste. Tori pointed out the bathroom down the hall and said I could shower if I wanted. They'd find me some clean clothes. Left alone, I checked the window first. Second floor, but there was a tree close enough to reach if necessary. The door didn't lock from either side. I memorized the layout visible from my doorway. Stairs at both ends of the hall. Emergency exit signs properly lit. At least 3 ways out if things went wrong. The shower was heaven. Hot water washed away 3 days of dirt and fear. I watched the pink swirl down the drain. Blood from my feet mixing with the grime. Someone had left shampoo that smelled like strawberries. I used too much, luxuriating in the scent. Clean clothes waited on the bed when I emerged. Nothing fancy, just jeans and a t-shirt with a faded cartoon character. They were slightly too big but soft from many washings. The pink dress lay crumpled in the corner where I dropped it. I kicked it under the bed. Good riddance. Downstairs, Victoria and Tori sat at a kitchen table with mugs of coffee. A third woman had joined them, older with gray streaks in her hair. They stopped talking when I appeared. The older woman smiled and introduced herself as the center's director. She had a name that sounded like it started with V, but I was too focused on their body language to catch it properly. They offered me hot chocolate and cookies, store-bought, not homemade, but I ate them anyway. The director asked if I felt safe talking about why I was on the streets. I shrugged, giving them pieces of truth mixed with careful omissions. Ran away from home. Parents were difficult. Needed some time to figure things out. They exchanged glances but didn't push. The director explained their policies. I could stay up to 3 days without parental contact if I was in immediate danger. After that, they'd need to involve other services. But for now, I was safe. They had counselors I could talk to if I wanted. Other kids stayed here sometimes too. too, though the house was quiet tonight. Victoria left after dinner, squeezing my shoulder gently. Tori showed me the common room with its donated books and board games. The television only got local channels, but I didn't care. I curled up on the couch and pretended to read while actually watching the parking lot through the window. Near midnight, a familiar car cruised past slowly. My heart hammered as I recognized Dad's silhouette. The car didn't stop, just made a slow circuit of the block before disappearing. They were expanding their search pattern, getting systematic. Mom must have sobered up enough to think strategically. I barely slept, startling at every sound. Footsteps in the hall sent me bolt upright. Just Tori checking on another resident. Car doors slamming made me creep to the window. Just neighbors coming home late. By dawn, exhaustion weighed heavier than fear. Breakfast was cereal and toast with other kids who'd found refuge here. A boy about my age with a bruised cheek. Twin girls who couldn't be more than 6, clinging to each other. We ate in silence, each lost in our own struggles. The director moved between us, offering seconds and gentle encouragement. After breakfast, Tori suggested I might want to talk to their counselor. Just a casual chat, nothing formal. I agreed because refusing would seem suspicious. The counselor was a man named Benjamin who wore glasses and spoke softly. His office had toys and art supplies, clearly designed to make children comfortable. He asked open-ended questions about my interests, my favorite subjects in school, safe topics that slowly circled closer to why I was here. I played along, sharing just enough to seem cooperative. Yes, things were hard at home. No, I didn't feel safe going back yet. Maybe in a few days when things calmed down. Benjamin took notes but didn't push. He offered me paper and colored pencils, suggesting I might want to draw or write. Sometimes it helped to express feelings that way. I drew meaningless patterns while he worked at his desk, giving me space. Lunch was soup and sandwiches. The twin girls had relaxed enough to giggle over something. The bruised boy helped clear tables without being asked. I watched the easy routine, the careful kindness. This place was exactly what it claimed to be, which made it dangerous in a different way. Comfort could make you careless. The way she checks every exit and counts escape routes while these people are just trying to help her. I wonder if that survival skill becomes permanent after living like she did. That afternoon, Victoria returned with news. She'd been asking around carefully, trying to understand my situation without raising alarms, but someone had recognized my description, the crying girl from the online posts, the one whose parents used her to scam people. She showed me her phone, scrolled through the comments on the original post. People were angry, calling for investigations, for child services to get involved. Some defended my parents, saying poverty drove people to desperate measures. Others shared similar stories of encountering us. The thread had hundreds of replies and kept growing. Victoria watched my face carefully as I read. She asked if the posts were true, if my parents had really used me that way. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. She asked if there was more, if the crying scam was the only thing, or if there were other concerns. I thought about Mom's phone calls, the negotiations about my special skills, the way she'd studied me like broken equipment that might still have value. But how could I explain that without proof? It would be my word against theirs, and they were very good at performing. Victoria didn't push. She said the online attention complicated things. My parents might back off knowing people were watching, or they might get desperate. Either way, I needed to be careful. The center could protect me for now, but we needed to think about longer-term solutions. That evening, I helped Tori prepare dinner. Simple work, chopping vegetables and stirring pots. She talked about her own childhood, difficult in different ways, how she'd found her way to this work, helping kids who reminded her of herself. Her stories were careful, designed to build trust without pushing too hard. After dinner, the director pulled me aside. My parents had called the center. They'd somehow tracked me down, probably through systematic calls to every shelter and resource in the area. They wanted to talk to me, wanted to apologize and work things out. The director had put them off, saying she'd check if I was even there, but they'd call back. They always did. I spent another restless night watching the parking lot. Sure enough, the car appeared around 2 a.m. This time it parked across the street. I could see 2 shapes inside, waiting, watching. They knew I was here. The question was what they'd do about it. Morning brought new complications. Benjamin mentioned that continuing to stay would require some formal documentation. Nothing major, just basic information to justify the resources. But any paperwork created a trail. My parents were lazy but not stupid. They'd know how to use official channels when desperate. I was running out of time. The 3-day grace period was almost up. After that, the center would have to follow protocols that would likely lead back to my parents. They'd perform their concerned parent act. And who would believe a kid who cried professionally over 2 adults who seemed so worried? During lunch, I overheard Tori and Victoria discussing options. Foster care was mentioned but dismissed as too complex. Extended family was suggested until they remembered I'd said there was none. They were trying to help within a system that assumed parents wanted what was best for their children. That afternoon, I made my decision. I thanked Benjamin for the art supplies and drew him a picture of a sunrise. I helped the twin girls with a puzzle, their trust a weight I didn't deserve. I folded the donated clothes neatly and left them on the bed, except one outfit. I'd need that. The emergency 20 was gone, spent on survival, but I'd noticed the donation box by the entrance. People dropped change in it sometimes. Not theft exactly, if I was donating myself to the streets. I waited until the house settled for the night, then crept downstairs. The box held maybe $15 in small bills and coins. I took 10, leaving 5 because even desperation had limits. The backdoor code was simple to remember from watching others. The night air hit cold against my face as I slipped outside. My parents' car was gone from across the street, probably circling the neighborhood in shifts, waiting for morning to make their move. I had a few hours head start if I was smart about it. This time I'd go further. This time I'd be harder to find. But first, one stop. The laundromat where this had started. It was closed, but I knew the alley. I retrieved the torn pink dress from under the dumpster where I'd hidden it after leaving the center. Not to wear, never again, but to remember. To carry proof of what I'd escaped. I folded it carefully and tucked it inside my jacket. Evidence of who I'd been. Reminder of who I refused to become. Then I started walking, keeping to shadows, heading for the bus station. $10 would get me partway to anywhere, far enough to figure out the rest. Behind me, the community center slept peacefully. Good people doing good work within a broken system. They'd wake to find me gone and feel they'd failed. But some rescues had to be self-made. Some escapes required leaving even the helpers behind. The bus station glowed ahead, promising distance and anonymity. I fingered the coins in my pocket, calculating routes and risks. My parents had taught me to perform, to manipulate, to survive. Now I'd use those skills for my own purposes, not to make them money, but to make myself free. A security guard dozed at his desk. The ticket window was closed, but machines worked all night. I fed my crumpled bills into the slot, selecting the farthest destination I could afford. The machine spit out a ticket for a place I'd never heard of. Perfect. While waiting for the bus, I used the bathroom to change my appearance, tucked my hair under a baseball cap I'd found, turned my jacket inside out to show a different color. Small changes that might buy time when my parents came looking. The bus arrived as dawn broke. I climbed aboard, choosing a seat near the back. Other passengers barely glanced at me. Just another kid traveling alone, nothing unusual in their world. I pressed my face to the window as we pulled away, watching the city shrink behind us. Miles passed in a blur of highway and small towns, each one a possibility, each one a place to disappear. I dozed fitfully, jerking awake whenever we stopped, checking faces, watching for familiar cars. But the further we went, the easier breathing became. By afternoon, my ticket had run out. The driver announced the stop, and I gathered my courage. Time to perform again, but differently. I approached a woman traveling traveling with her teenage daughter. Explained I'd gotten separated from my group. Could they help me figure out which connecting bus to catch? The woman was kind, checking schedules on her phone. Her daughter shared a granola bar without being asked. They assumed I belonged somewhere, was expected somewhere. I let them believe it, accepting their help with grateful smiles. They were heading 2 states over to visit family. The daughter mentioned they had an extra ticket because her brother had gotten sick. Would I like to ride along until I figured out my connection? The mother hesitated, but I was clean and polite and clearly in need. I accepted with just enough reluctance to seem genuine. Settled into their world of road trip snacks and audiobooks. Let their normalcy wash over me like camouflage. With each mile, my old life fell further behind. But I knew it wasn't over. My parents wouldn't give up easily. Their income had vanished with me. They'd search, scheme, manipulate others into helping. The skills they taught me would serve them in hunting me down. This was just the first move in a longer game. The woman asked gentle questions about my family. I crafted a story close enough to truth. Difficult home situation. Staying with relatives for a while. Parents knew where I was going. She accepted it, probably sensing the deeper currents but respecting my boundaries. Night fell as we crossed state lines. The daughter had fallen asleep, head against the window. Her mother drove steadily, occasionally glancing at me in the rearview mirror. I pretended to doze but stayed alert. Trust was still a luxury I couldn't afford. At a rest stop, I used the bathroom and considered my options. I could stay with them longer, ride all the way to their destination, but that would create questions, connections, ways to be traced. Better to disappear cleanly while they thought well of me. I thanked them at the next major station, said my aunt would meet me here, waved goodbye with a smile that almost felt real. They drove away believing they'd helped a child in need. They had, just not the way they imagined. The station was larger than the last one, more crowds to blend into, more destinations to choose from. I studied the departure board, looking for patterns, which routes ran all night, which cities were big enough to disappear in but small enough to survive. A name caught my eye, not because I knew it, but because I didn't. A place that sounded like nowhere special, the kind of town people passed through without stopping. Perfect for someone who needed to stop existing for a while, but tickets cost money I didn't have. The donation box trick wouldn't work here. Security cameras covered every angle. I needed a different approach, something that used my skills without recreating my parents' schemes. I watched Travelers, reading them like mom had taught me, looking for the tells that revealed character. There, a businessman arguing on his phone, briefcase forgotten on the bench beside him. There, a family juggling too many bags and children. There, an elderly man struggling with a ticket machine. I approached the elderly man, offered to help with genuine kindness, no performance needed. He was grateful, confused by the technology. I walked him through the process, made sure he got the senior discount. He pressed a $5 bill into my hand, despite my protests. Running away with $10 and a torn dress for company, kids got more planning skills than most adults with retirement accounts, though the budget could use some work. $5 closer to escape. I helped others when opportunities arose naturally, carried bags for an overwhelmed mother, gave directions I'd overheard to confused tourists, small acts that sometimes earned gratitude in tangible form, not scamming, just being useful while desperate. By evening, I'd accumulated enough for a medium-distance ticket. Not as far as I wanted, but far enough for now. I'd figure out the next step when I got there. One escape at a time, one performance at a time. But performing for myself now, not for them. The bus loaded as darkness fell. I found a seat, tucked my few possessions close. The pink dress stayed folded in my jacket, a talisman of what I'd survived. Around me, other travelers settled in for the overnight journey, each carrying their own stories, their own escapes. As we pulled away, I allowed myself one moment of grief for the childhood I'd never had, for the parents I'd needed instead of the ones I got, for the little girl who'd learned to cry on command, and the woman she'd have to become to survive. Then I pushed it down, locked it away with all the other feelings I couldn't afford. The bus carried me into the night, toward a future I couldn't imagine but had to believe in. Behind me, my parents would be scheming, searching, performing their concern, but I was done being their gold mine, done crying for strangers' money, done being whatever someone else needed me to be. The road stretched ahead, dark and uncertain. I pressed my face to the window and watched the world pass by, each mile a small victory. Somewhere out there was a place where I could stop running, where I could figure out who I was when I wasn't performing, where the tears could be real or not come at all. I just had to keep moving until I found it. One bus at a time, one day at a time, one escaped child learning to be free. The bus station in the new town was smaller than I'd expected, just a concrete platform with a rusted bench and a vending machine that hummed too loudly. I watched other passengers disperse into waiting cars or disappear down unfamiliar streets. The pink dress pressed against my ribs through my jacket, a constant reminder. I found a diner 2 blocks away, its neon sign flickering in the pre-dawn darkness. The waitress barely glanced up when I entered. I ordered water and sat in a corner booth, studying the laminated menu while calculating my remaining funds. $4 and change, enough for toast, maybe eggs if I skipped lunch. Through the window, I watched the town wake up. A man in coveralls unlocked a hardware store across the street. A woman walked her dog, pausing to let it sniff every lamppost. Normal people living normal lives, the kind of life I'd never known but desperately wanted. The waitress refilled my water without asking. Her name tag read Dottie, and she moved with the efficiency of someone who'd worked breakfast rushes for decades. When she brought my toast, she set down an extra packet of jam without charging me. Small kindnesses from strangers still surprised me. I made the meal last, watching patterns emerge in the morning routine. The hardware store owner swept his sidewalk at exactly 7. The dog walker returned at 7:15. A school bus rumbled past at 7:30, faces pressed against windows. I memorized it all, building a map of this new place in my mind. By 8, the diner had filled with regulars. Construction workers grabbing coffee before their shift. Office workers in pressed shirts checking phones between bites. I stayed small in my corner, invisible the way I'd learned to be when not performing. But invisibility wouldn't feed me tomorrow. I left a careful tip from my dwindling funds and walked the main street, reading help wanted signs. The grocery store needed stalkers. The motel by the highway advertised for housekeeping. Places that might not ask too many questions about a young girl seeking work. But I looked younger than my years, malnourished and small. Who would hire a child? The library opened at 9. I slipped inside, grateful for the warmth and quiet. The librarian, an older woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain, smiled but didn't approach. I found a corner table and pulled out the pink dress, spreading it carefully across the wood surface. The fabric told my story in stains and tears. Here, a grass stain from performing outside the unemployment office. There, a small burn hole from mom's cigarette when I'd cried too slowly. The new rip from the fence, still raw and fraying, evidence of everything I'd survived. I folded it smaller and smaller until it fit in my palm. Then I stood and walked to the librarian's desk. She looked up with kind eyes, waiting. I placed the folded dress on her desk and pushed it forward. She touched it gently, understanding something wordless had passed between us. She opened a drawer and pulled out a plastic bag, the kind they used for lost and found items. Together we sealed the dress inside. She wrote the date on a label and nothing else. Then she filed it away in a cabinet behind her desk. Neither of us spoke, but I felt lighter walking away. The library had a bulletin board near the entrance. I studied the posted notices, babysitting services, lost cats. A handwritten ad caught my eye. Farm help needed, room and board included, no experience necessary. A phone number was written in careful script below. I memorized the number and found a payphone outside. My hands shook as I dialed. windshield. A woman answered on the third ring, her voice rough but not unkind. I explained I'd seen her ad, that I was looking for work. She asked my age. I added 3 years to the truth. She asked if I was in trouble. I said no, just needing a fresh start. She gave me directions to a farm 15 miles outside town. Said her husband would be at the feed store until noon if I needed a ride. Described his truck, a green Ford with a cracked windshield. I thanked her and hung up, my heart racing with possibility and fear. The feed store smelled like grain and leather. I found the green truck easily, its owner loading bags of chicken feed into the bed. He was older, weathered by sun and work, with hands that spoke of honest labor. I approached carefully, mentioned his wife's name and the phone call. He studied me for a long moment, taking in my too thin frame and bandaged feet. Then he nodded toward the passenger seat. We drove in silence through countryside I'd never seen, rolling fields and scattered farmhouses, sky that seemed bigger than anything I'd known in the city. The farm was small but well kept, a white house with a wraparound porch, a red barn that had seen better days, chickens pecking in the yard. His wife met us at the door, wiping flour-dusted hands on her apron. She was round and solid, with gray hair pulled back in a practical bun. She showed me around without preamble. The spare room was tiny but clean, with a quilt-covered bed and a window overlooking the vegetable garden. The bathroom down the hall had running water and a bathtub with claw feet. She explained the work: feeding chickens, collecting eggs, helping with the garden, general chores. I nodded at everything, eager to prove myself useful. She set me to work immediately, showing me how to scatter feed for the chickens without getting pecked, how to check nesting boxes for eggs. The chickens regarded me with suspicious eyes, but I moved slowly, and they soon ignored me. Lunch was simple but filling. Soup and bread at a kitchen table scarred by years of use. They asked few questions, seeming to understand that my past was better left undisturbed. Instead, they talked about the farm, the upcoming harvest, the new calf born last week. That afternoon, I worked until my muscles ached, weeding the garden, hauling water, stacking firewood, physical labor that left no room for thinking or remembering. When evening came, I could barely keep my eyes open through dinner. They paid me in room and board, plus a small wage they insisted on despite my protests. I fell asleep that first night to the sound of crickets and wind through trees. No sirens, no shouting, no parents scheming in the next room, just peaceful darkness and the promise of tomorrow's work. Days blended into weeks. I learned the rhythms of farm life. Early mornings collecting eggs, afternoons in the garden, evenings helping with dinner. My hands grew calloused, my arms stronger. The hollow look left my face as regular meals filled me out. The couple, Margaret and Frank, treated me like the grandchild they'd never had. They taught me practical skills: how to can vegetables, how to mend fences, how to read the weather in cloud formations, knowledge that had nothing to do with manipulation or performance. Sometimes I caught them watching me with concern, when thunderstorms made me flinch, when car engines in the distance made me freeze, but they never pushed, never demanded explanations, just offered steady presence and patient understanding. One morning, while feeding the chickens, I heard a familiar sound, a car engine idling at the end of the long driveway. My body went cold despite the summer heat. I couldn't see the car from where I stood, but I knew that engine sound. Dad always said the Ford needed a new muffler. I dropped the feed bucket and ran for the barn, climbed the ladder to the hayloft and pressed myself against the wall. Through a crack in the boards, I watched my parents' car creep up the driveway. They'd found me. Somehow, they'd tracked me to this quiet place. Margaret emerged from the house, dish towel in hand. Mom got out first, already arranging her face into false concern. Dad followed, hanging back like always, letting her work. I couldn't hear their words, but I recognized the performance. The worried parents, the missing daughter, the desperate search. Margaret listened, nodding occasionally. Then Frank appeared from the tool shed, pitchfork in hand. Not threatening exactly, but present. I wonder how she knew exactly when 7 o'clock was without a watch or clock. Does living on the streets teach you to read time by the sun and shadows? Solid. Mom's gestures grew more animated. Dad pulled out his phone, probably showing photos, evidence of their loving family. But Margaret and Frank had lived long enough to recognize truth from performance. They stood firm, a united wall of polite refusal. No, they hadn't seen any young girls. No, they couldn't help. Perhaps try the sheriff's office in town. Have a blessed day. Mom's mask slipped. I saw her real face emerge, the calculating coldness I knew so well. Dad stepped forward, trying a different angle, but Frank simply pointed toward the road. A clear dismissal. Get off our property, now. They retreated to their car, but I knew they wouldn't give up easily. Not when their income source was this close. They'd wait, watch, look for another angle. I stayed frozen in the hayloft as their car disappeared down the road. Margaret called my assumed name, the one I'd given them when I arrived. I climbed down slowly, hay stuck to my clothes and tears I hadn't realized were falling. She took one look at my face and understood. Those were the people I was running from, the danger I couldn't name. Frank disappeared into the house and returned with a shotgun. Not to use, but to clean on the porch where it could be seen from the road. A clear message to anyone watching. This farm protected its own. Margaret guided me inside and made tea with steady hands. They didn't ask questions, didn't demand the truth. But that night at dinner, Frank mentioned his brother who lived 3 states away, had a bigger farm, always needing help. Good people who understood sometimes folks needed distance from their past. The offer hung in the air like grace. I helped Margaret with the dishes, thinking running again meant leaving this safe place. These people who'd shown me kindness without condition, but staying put them at risk. My parents wouldn't stop. They'd find another angle, another performance. Maybe claim Margaret and Frank had kidnapped me. The possibilities for manipulation were endless. That night, I packed my few belongings. The clothes Margaret had given me, the small amount of money I'd saved, a photo she'd taken of me feeding the chickens, my first real smile caught on film. I left a note on the kitchen table, thanking them in inadequate words. Frank was waiting by his truck at dawn. He'd known I'd run, maybe had even expected it. He drove me to a bus station 2 towns over, handed me an envelope with money I tried to refuse. Inside was also a letter of introduction to his brother, a job waiting if I wanted it. The bus pulled away as the sun rose. I pressed my face to the window, watching the countryside blur past. Somewhere behind me, my parents were still searching, still scheming. But I had something now I hadn't had before. Proof that kindness existed, that some people helped without expecting performance in return. Miles accumulated between me and them. Each state line crossed felt like victory. I dozed fitfully, dreaming of chickens and gardens and Margaret's gentle hands. When I woke, afternoon light slanted through the windows and we were pulling into another station. Frank's brother met me as promised. Another weathered farmer with work-rough hands. Another farm needing help. Another chance to disappear into honest labor. He asked no questions about my past, only whether I was willing to work hard. I nodded, following him to another truck. Another long drive through unfamiliar country. This farm was larger, more workers, more anonymity. I blended into the rhythm of daily tasks. Milking cows, baling hay, fixing fences. My body grew stronger, my sleep deeper. The nightmares came less frequently, though they never fully stopped. Months passed in seasonal rhythms. Planting, growing, harvesting. I sent Margaret and Frank a postcard with no return address, just to let them know I was safe. I wondered if my parents still searched or if they'd finally given up, if they'd found another scheme, another way to avoid honest work. The other farm workers accepted me without question. Young people often showed up seeking agricultural work, some running from something, some running to something. We worked side by side in comfortable silence, each carrying our own stories. I learned to drive a tractor, to birth calves, to predict weather by the ache in my joints. Skills that belonged to me alone, not performances for others' benefit. but real knowledge earned through sweat and persistence. Each new ability felt like reclaiming pieces of myself. One day, while repairing a fence along the property line, I saw a familiar car on the distant road. My hands stilled on the wire, but the car kept moving, disappearing around a bend. Maybe them, maybe not. The fear was still there, but smaller now, manageable. That night, I made a decision. I'd been running for over a year, living in fear of discovery, but I was different now, stronger. I'd learned that not everyone wanted to use me, that kindness existed without manipulation, that I could be valuable for more than just tears. I approached the farm owner about school. There was a program for workers to get their GED. He agreed to adjust my schedule to accommodate classes. Education was another form of escape, one they couldn't take from me. The classes were hard. I'd missed so much school during my performing years, but I worked at it with the same determination I brought to farm labor. Slowly, letters became words, became understanding. Numbers made sense in ways they never had before. Other students in the program had their own stories of interrupted education. We studied together in the library, teaching each other what we knew. I discovered I was good at explaining things, patient with others' struggles because I understood how it felt to be behind. The teacher noticed too, suggested I might consider teaching someday. The idea seemed impossible but planted itself anyway. Me, a teacher, helping kids who'd fallen through cracks, who'd been used or neglected or forgotten, kids who needed someone to see them as more than their circumstances. I passed the GED on my second try. The certificate felt heavier than paper in my hands, proof of capability that had nothing to do with crying on command. I framed it and hung it in my small room above the farm's garage. My first real achievement. The farm owner's wife helped me apply for community college, financial aid for agricultural workers, grants for rural students, forms that required a social security number I provided with shaking hands, official documents that could create a trail back to me, but I filled them out anyway. Acceptance came with the spring planting, a chance to study while still working part-time on the farm, education courses because that planted idea had grown roots. Maybe I could help kids like I'd been, show them different paths than the ones their parents chose. I bought a used car with saved wages, nothing fancy, but it ran, and it was mine, paid for with honest work. The first thing I'd ever owned that wasn't tainted by manipulation or schemes. I drove it to campus that first day with windows down, feeling something like freedom. Classes challenged me in new ways. Child development, educational psychology, subjects that helped me understand my own past while preparing for a different future. I studied in the library between farm shifts, determined to succeed. Sometimes I still checked parking lots for familiar cars, still tensed when someone mentioned traveling performers or charity scams. The hypervigilance might never fully fade, but it no longer controlled my days. I had built a life they couldn't touch. Years accumulated like soil layers, each semester completed, each grade earned, each connection made with fellow students who became friends, people who knew me as I was now, not who I'd been forced to be, who valued me for my work ethic and kindness, not my ability to cry. I student taught at a rural elementary school, recognized the signs in some students, the exhaustion, the hypervigilance, the performance of being okay when everything at home was chaos. I couldn't save them all, but I could create safe spaces, quiet moments where they didn't have to pretend. Graduation approached with a mix of pride and terror. A teaching certificate would mean background checks, official records, all the things I'd avoided since running. But I'd built enough of a real life now, had references who knew my work, had a history that started the day I arrived at that first farm. The ceremony was small, rural college, not many education graduates. I sat among strangers who'd become family through shared struggle. Frank's brother attended, wearing his only suit. Margaret sent a card with pressed flowers from her garden, evidence of the life I'd built from nothing. I accepted a position at a small school 3 counties over, far enough to feel safe, close enough to maintain the connections I'd made. The interview committee asked why I wanted to teach in such a rural area. I spoke about understanding struggle, about seeing potential where others saw problems. My classroom became a refuge like that first farm had been for me. Books everywhere, quiet corners for overwhelmed kids, a drawer full of snacks for those who came hungry, small safeties I could provide within the system's limitations. The first parent-teacher conference tested me, watching parents perform concern while their child sat silent, recognizing the signs I knew too well. But I also met parents who genuinely struggled, who loved their kids but battled poverty and circumstance. Not all parents were mine. One student reminded me too much of myself, quiet, watchful, perfect behavior that felt like performance. She stayed after school to help clean boards that didn't need cleaning, avoiding home without saying so. I let her stay, grading papers while she organized already organized shelves. Slowly, she began to trust. Mentioned things in passing, how her uncle made her uncomfortable. Margaret's pressed flowers in that graduation card hit different than any fancy gift ever could. Farm folks showing love through garden memories while our narrator trades tears for textbooks proves sometimes the best revenge really is a teaching degree. How her mom worked 3 jobs and never saw what happened when she was gone. How she'd learned to be invisible to stay safe. Different performance, same survival. I couldn't fix her home, couldn't prove what I suspected, but I could teach her what Margaret had taught me, that she had value beyond her usefulness to others, that kindness existed without conditions, that there were adults who'd help without wanting something in return. The school year ended with her smile looking less like performance and more like truth. Small victory in a world full of kids who needed more than any teacher could give, but small victories accumulated like everything else. Each child reached, each moment of genuine connection. Summer meant returning to farm work, helping with harvest at the place that had first sheltered me. The physical labor grounded me after months of emotional teaching work, reminded me where I'd started and how far I'd traveled, not just in miles but in becoming. That August, while preparing my classroom for the new year, I got a letter forwarded from my college. No return address, but I recognized Mom's handwriting. My hands shook opening it. Inside, a brief note. They'd seen my graduation announcement in some rural paper. Were proud of me, hoped I was well. No request for money, no manipulation, no performance, just words that might have been genuine or might have been another angle I couldn't see. I read it twice, then fed it to the burn barrel behind the school. The past could acknowledge me, but it couldn't reclaim me. New students arrived with new stories, some obvious in their damage, others hiding it well. I taught them reading and writing and arithmetic, but also that they were more than their circumstances, that education was a door to different futures, that they had choices, even when it felt like they didn't. Years passed in school bells and seasons. I earned a master's degree through night classes, became the teacher others sent troubled kids to, the one who understood without needing explanations, who created space for children to exist without performing. I bought a small house near the school, nothing fancy, but mine, filled it with books and plants and quiet corners, a refuge for myself like I created for my students, proof that running children could grow into stable adults, that survival could become thriving. Sometimes former students visited, showed me their own diplomas, their own escapes into different futures. We never spoke directly about what they'd left behind, but understanding passed between us. The conspiracy of the survived, the quiet victory of the rebuilt. I thought about Victoria sometimes, the woman who'd first shown me unconditional help, wondered if she knew her small kindness had rippled into all these other kindnesses, how one genuine moment had broken the pattern of performance and manipulation, how it had saved not just me but every student I reached. The pink dress stayed filed away in some library basement, evidence of who I'd been, but I no longer needed to carry it. The scars were enough reminder, the hypervigilance that made made me good at spotting struggling students, the performance skills that helped me teach. Even damage could be repurposed into tools. Parent-teacher conferences still triggered old fears, but I'd learned to breathe through them, to see the parents who genuinely tried, to document concerns about the ones who didn't, to be the adult I'd needed when I was small and trapped and performing to survive. One autumn evening, grading papers at my kitchen table, I realized I'd stopped checking parking lots, stopped tensing at certain engine sounds. The fear had faded to background noise, still there but no longer controlling. I'd built a life too full for constant vigilance. My story wasn't unique. Every teacher had students with similar tales, kids who performed different roles to survive different circumstances, but I could recognize them, could offer what had been offered to me. Not rescue, but tools. Not salvation, but possibility. The school expanded my role. Student advocate, liaison for at-risk youth, fancy titles for what I'd always done, see the kids others missed, create spaces for them to drop their masks, show them doors they didn't know existed. Small work that felt enormous when it worked. Winter brought a new student, transferred mid-year, red flags in his withdrawn behavior, perfect performance of the good student while his eyes stayed blank. I recognized the exhaustion, the careful movements, the way he counted lunch money like it was precious beyond its worth. I gave him the same gift Margaret had given me. No questions, no pushing, just consistent safety and patient presence. Let him stay after school organizing things that didn't need organizing, grading papers while he existed in a space without performance requirements. Weeks passed before he mentioned things, how his family moved constantly, how his older sister had run away and they were looking for her, how he was tired of being the good one who earned the money. Different details, same story. The cycle continuing in another generation. I couldn't tell him about my past directly, but I could teach him about options, about education as escape, about building skills that belonged to him alone, about the difference between surviving and living. Lessons wrapped in math problems and reading assignments. Spring came with its promise of renewal. The boy had started to smile genuinely, had made a friend, had mentioned maybe wanting to go to college someday. Small changes that felt like miracles to those who understood their weight. Seeds planted that might grow into different futures. My life had become what I'd never imagined possible. Stable, meaningful, connected to community in ways that had nothing to do with performance. I'd transformed from the crying girl into someone who helped crying children. Full circle but spiraling upward. The farm couple who'd first helped me had passed on, but their kindness lived in every child I reached, every safe space I created, every moment I chose patience over pressure. They'd taught me that help could exist without manipulation. I passed that lesson forward daily. Teaching awards felt strange on my wall. Recognition for simply seeing children as full humans, for creating classrooms where performance wasn't required, for understanding that behavior was communication and listening to what it said. Basic humanity that felt revolutionary in broken systems. I kept Margaret's photograph on my desk, a reminder of where kindness had led. Students sometimes asked about the old woman with chickens. I'd tell them about a friend who taught me important things. Let them interpret what they needed from the story. Truth without exposure. Summer vacation meant time to work on the house. Paint rooms, plant gardens, create beauty I'd never imagined owning. Each improvement felt like defiance against the chaos I'd grown up in. Proof that children raised in dysfunction could create function. That survival skills could become building skills. The new school year always brought familiar rhythms. Setting up classrooms, meeting new students, watching for the ones who needed extra support, the ones whose smiles never reached their eyes, whose perfect behavior masked desperation. My people, though they didn't know it yet. I'd built a life worth living from the scraps of a childhood worth escaping. Not through dramatic rescue or intervention, just through accumulation of small choices. Each day deciding to build rather than perform. Each year growing stronger in my own skin. The girl who cried for money had become a woman who created spaces where children didn't have to perform, where exhaustion was met with understanding, where survival was honored while growth was encouraged, where the past informed the present without controlling it. My story had no neat ending because life continued forward. Each semester brought new challenges, new students carrying new traumas, new opportunities to interrupt cycles of dysfunction, new chances to plant seeds of possibility in ground that seemed barren. But I'd learned that broken things could be rebuilt differently, that performance could transform into purpose, that the skills learned in dysfunction could serve function, that running away could become running toward. That survival was just the beginning of the story. The pink dress remained filed away in that distant library, a relic of who I'd been, but I no longer needed to carry it or hide from it. It was simply part of the story that led to this moment. Grading papers at my kitchen table, preparing lessons for tomorrow, living a life I'd chosen rather than performed, free in ways that little girl could never have imagined but somehow always hoped for. Thanks for tagging along while we unpacked all that. I've really loved wondering through it all with you. Can't wait to dive into more next time. Subscribe for more content like this.